Okay, a comparison of two language ability scales that are quite popular these days. Can you guess which two I'm going to talk about? Well, I'm really combining what could be called two into one. The ACTFL ILR. The Interagency Language Roundtable, ILR, has been doing proficiency testing actually since 1956, has been modifying, improving the system with some major adjustments made in the early 80s, and then ACTFL, for academic purposes, took the work that was being done there and developed a comparable scale. Another scale, actually it's 59 different scales, but people seem to only be aware of the one can-do statements, one set of can-do statements. But the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, Learning, Teaching, and Assessment is another very popular scale these days, okay? So let's ask ourselves, which of those scales is better and for which purpose? Okay? Every proficiency scale should have these three essential elements. If you're going to have a criterion test or proficiency test, you need to be able to describe what it is that's to be done. What's the communication task? In which context or under what conditions is it to be done? What topics are to be covered? What domains are to be included, for instance? And then how well is it to be done? So just think of task, conditions or context, and accuracy as three elements that must be there if you're going to have a fully operational scale. All right? Here's a quick summary of the ILR scale using the ILR numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see, even though it's written in paragraphs, you can pull out of those paragraphs tasks to be accomplished, context or topics to be covered, and accuracy, expectations. And as you move up the scale, the accuracy expectations become greater, the context become broader or more defined, and the tasks become more difficult. Okay? Here's the ACTFL equivalent of the same thing. Notice it no longer says 0 or 1 or 2 or 3. It says novice, intermediate, advanced, and superior. Those are the ACTFL names for the 0, 1, 2, 3. And that was a great improvement. Why? Can you imagine talking to a student at the end of the second semester and saying, congratulations, you're a better 0 now than you were last semester? Yeah, or maybe you're a 0 plus. Here you can say you were a novice low, then a novice mid, then a novice high, and you can show progress being made. And that was very important in academic settings where you often have no more than an hour a day and sometimes less to work on the language. But again, you have the same thing, global tasks, functions, context or content, accuracy, expectations, and they've added, because they found it really useful for people to have this added definition of what they meant by the task or how well, it's kind of a combination of those text types. At the lowest level, at the novice level, there'll be individual words and phrases. At the intermediate or level 1, discrete sentences. When you get to the advanced, though, you're now doing multiple paragraphs with connected discourse, transitions, those things that add to cohesiveness. And at the superior level, really, truly extended discourse. You might even say instead of paragraphs, we're now talking about pages of discourse if you were trying to write it down. Okay. The Council of Europe framework, how many here have on their bookshelf at least the blue book with that title? Council of Europe Framework of Reference for, Erica does? Okay. I was hoping it'd be more than that. I've found that about 10 times as many people have it on their bookshelf as have read it. But that's not unusual. Everybody intends to read things, right? Let's see, though, if we look at that book, it's a blue cover, so you'll recognize it when you see it. Has, let's see how those scales look in terms of task, conditions, topics, and accuracy expectations. Okay, the other thing you'll notice is they have levels A, B, C, but within those they have an A1 and an A2. Some of the wording you'll see here looks quite familiar to what the earlier scales, the ILR and the ACTFL scales, have in terms of wording. You can produce simple phrases about people and places, mainly isolated phrases. Does that sound like a novice, maybe? Okay. A2, give a simple description or presentation. Whoa. Boy, that sounds like a really high-level task. About people living or working daily routines, likes, dislikes. Boy, that seems like a big jump. But how well are you going to do it? A short series of simple phrases, maybe sentences, linked into a list. So you're not going to do it very well. For me, that seems a little out of balance, but at least they've defined all three. Then they go on to the B levels. This is, by the way, this is overall oral production. This is the scale I'm working with right now. There are over 50 other scales, but it's page 58. Sustain a straightforward description. Okay, that's starting to sound like something we'd read at advanced level, isn't it? On a variety of subjects within his/her field of interest. Reasonably fluent linear sequence of points. Points. Is this connected discourse or not? Or is it just points? From what I've seen in the interpretations of this, that's it's not expected that you would have connected discourse in the sense that we would expect it at an advanced level. Okay, now they need to break down B2, B1. B2 needs to get broken down into 2.1 and 2.2. So now you're talking about give presentation, descriptions, presentations, expand and support ideas. Now that's starting to sound maybe like an advanced level, wide range of subjects, but still related to his or her field of interest. Clear, detailed, and relevant. B2.2, give descriptions and presentations with highlighting of significant points and supporting detail. No reference to topic. Does it mean anything or does it mean everything? You don't know. Okay. C1, give descriptions and presentations on complex subjects, integrate sub-themes, develop particular points, round off with a conclusion. Oh, that's a lot of language. About what? Anything, everything. Rehearsed, unrehearsed. Don't know. C2, produce speech with an effective logical structure. Gee, that might even be easier than the previous one. But we don't know whether it's rehearsed, unrehearsed, what the topic range is, but it's supposed to be clear, smoothing. Now, maybe this is what makes it more difficult. It's clear, smoothly flowing, well-structured. Okay, why don't they have this specificity in the scales? I have a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that the authors of these scales were brilliant individuals, but all of them were right-brained. And no one with a left brain went back through and edited to see if everything was covered. Okay, here's some other explanations potentially. The manual talks about 3 types of proficiency. Emerging competence is called proficiency. We just called that, in our my terminology, rehearsed. Emerging competence in relevant situation. Or competence on tasks in a relevant syllabus. They'd call it proficiency. We might even call that achievement. They then talk about the generalizable competencies evidenced by a candidate's overall performance, but they don't label it as anything. They just say that's one of the possible kinds of proficiency. However, if you're talking to someone that's used to using the ACTFL ILR scale, only this last definition of proficiency would be considered proficiency. So we have a communication gap across the Atlantic. Okay, the CEFR acknowledges a third or blended category, something between achievement and proficiency, but it doesn't label it. You can read all of page 184 and before and after, and you won't find a specific label, although they talk about there's something in between there. And we talk about that in-between stage as rehearsed performance or just performance, or even per achievement. Okay. Some other examples. There is a self-assessment scale, often referred to as the can-do. However, that scale contains absolutely no accuracy statements. Can you do this or not? And you rate yourself. Interestingly, there's bound to be some cultural implications. If your first culture is an American culture, you're probably going to overrate your abilities. If your first culture is Japan, comes from Japan, you're going to underrate your abilities because there's no accuracy statements there. Okay, table 3 there's a scale called qualitative aspects of spoken language use. It contains almost nothing but accuracy statements, but with multiple different labels. What's your range? What's your rate of fluency? What's your ability to interact? What's your coherence? Okay, how do you deal with these interactions? I think I'll wrap up this part if you'll stick with me, and then we'll give everybody a break, okay? Since every comprehensive testing system has this idea of tasks, topical domains, and levels of ability, everyone has to deal with these 3 issues. But they deal with them differently. It's complex enough, but then you get to how people interpret this and you'll find they do it differently. Okay, not all of the CEFR scales describe all 3 factors. So it occurred to me, hey, I could take that scale with all the accuracy things and combine it with one of the other scales that's missing accuracy, and we'd have something that would be workable. However, the authors say that we are not to combine scales. And then you say, well, why not? Well, giving that some thought, I decided to create too many rating options to be workable. Consider, for instance, the combination of the CEFR overall oral production scale and the general linguistic range scale, pages 58 and 110. The overall production has 7 defined levels. The linguistic range has 9 defined levels. You combine them, you're going to get 63 different possible ratings. How do they deal with that? They simply say it's not practical to use the scales at all levels. All the scales at all levels. That's their way of dealing with it. They also say that any rating given should be linked to the learner's textbook and defined by criteria that are appropriate to the requirements of the assessment task concerned. Okay, on the scale of achievement to proficiency, which direction is that moving? Back toward achievement. Okay, CEFR also suggests that you simplify the rating process by recombining, renaming, and reducing scales into smaller sets of assessment criteria appropriate to the needs of learners. So you can pick and decide what you want to rate your class on. It also says that your testing should recognize the style of the pedagogic culture concerned. There's also complexity, if you think about it, even with the original ILR scale. Right? It goes 0 to 5, which means there's 6 levels. Each of those 6 levels exists for task, for content descriptions, and for accuracy. So if you allowed them to be rated independently, you would have possibility of 6 times 6 times 6 cells that you could rate people in, or you could get 216 different ratings. So how does the ILR, or how do the ACTFL scales deal with this? They take, of those 216, a row that seems to make sense. where for the task to be performed, what are the kind of contexts you do that task in, and how well would you be expected to do it generally? They align them, and that becomes a criterion across that one level. All right? Each higher level requires additional tasks, extra conditions, and increased accuracy. That reduces the 216 down to 6. All right? They also, in building that array, considered, as we would hope, what's a reasonable real-world expectation? When you have to do these things, how well do you normally have to do it to accomplish the task? Then they stipulate that all of the conditions, the task, the context, and the accuracy must be accomplished to earn that rating. If you do 2 out of 3, doesn't qualify, right? So say you can handle language in question and answers, but you can't yet narrate, describe, pull things together into paragraphs. But boy, do you ever have a wide vocabulary. You've just been reading and reading and reading, and you have this lexicon that is just unparalleled. The lexicon might even put you clear up toward the 3 or 4 level. And your accuracy, well, maybe you're even good enough that you could communicate with people not used to dealing with foreigners. So you've got a rating down here, you've got a rating up here, and a rating down there. What's the overall rating? It's the lowest. It becomes a blocking factor for you earning the next level. A lot of people don't understand that. Or even if they understand it, they don't understand why that's necessary. Okay, here's a quick summary. I think we're getting to the end of this part. Comparison, ACTFL ILR versus framework of reference. Primary purpose is to test individuals' general proficiency. From what I read out of the blue manual, the primary purpose seems to be to influence curriculum and instructional practices. Primary users are teachers or program administrators. Primary users on the other side include students, so they can see themselves making progress.
Good thing.
Yeah, which is a very good thing. I'm not saying bad, good. I'm just saying different. All right? By design, ACTFL ILR is underspecified for measuring step-by-step progress for students. When you look at the other scales in the CEFR, they're often underspecified for measuring general real-world progress. As a result, you see this kind of offset with general unrehearsed real-world proficiency going up to the superior level, or emerging competency, competence in relevance aspects of a syllabus. There's a little bit of a contrast there. Note, we're speaking now in generalities. The Association of Language Testers in Europe is working very hard to try and create some standardization out of the CEFR scales. For instance, the Goethe Institute is developing a curriculum-independent proficiency test which will be rated according to CEFR. And it can be done, you just have to decide how you're going to fill in those blanks. Still, if you look at the portfolios that are based on CEFRs, the general tendency is toward achievement or perhaps performance. Okay, given these contrasting characteristics, what kind of tests are ACTFL ILR tests? Achievement, performance, or proficiency? We hope they're proficiency. Now, notice the next question to help maybe refine that first question. What kind of tests are ACTFL derivative tests? Tests that use maybe the ACTFL scale, or say we're using the ACTFL scale and we're using the ACTFL ratings, but we have our own test. You don't know. You just don't know until you analyze the test itself, the items, the relationship to curricula, the relationship to the real world. You just don't know, okay? What kind of tests are ALTE or the CEFR certified tests, such as the test of Deutsch als Fremdsprache that has been certified by this central, it's not a governing body, it's interesting, it's a professional organization that provides advice, and if you meet the criteria, will certify your test. And there's some prestige in that. But if you have gone through that process, what kind of a test would you have? Again, it depends. The ones I've seen are striving often for proficiency, but this particular example only tests language in academic settings. Language use in academic settings. So it would be a performance test for that setting, for that purpose. Okay. What kind of tests are based on the CFR descriptions? Therefore, any and all of the above, right? You don't know until you look at it. All right, same as the last question on the other. Okay, what kind of skills are we trying to assess here with ACTFL ILR? Unrehearsed. What kind of skills do the CFR scales assess? Remember the title? Frame of reference for learning, teaching or instruction, I think, and testing. It's trying to do it all, depending on which scale you pick and how you use it. All right? Are these differences a problem? I'd say no. But the misapplication of either testing scale could be a problem. All right? Closing word from Albert Einstein. The solutions to our problems should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. There is no answer to the simple question, which test is better between ACTFL or CEFR? You have to know more than that. There is an answer, which type of test is better for a given purpose. I think you've earned a break. Again, achievement, performance, and proficiency. Here's my recommendation. Pick the right test for the right purpose. Textbook would be specific tests to test their short-term progress, and then you move up. All right, that's the end of part 2. The other parts aren't nearly as long. We're going to really pick up momentum here as we move along. But I am sure everyone could use a break. We'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Okay, any questions that I should capture to make sure we include them in the wrap-up at this point on the white paper? Any questions? Yes?
I have a question about, like, you focus on proficiency in speaking. What about the other skills?
Other skills. Okay, we will.
Like reading.
What about the other skills? Okay.
And I have another question too about accuracy.
Uh-huh.
Like, is there a number of mistakes that you have to look for, or is there a pattern of mistakes, or how do you know that two testers are online regarding accuracy?
Uh-huh. Okay. The question about other skills, short answer, yes, there are proficiency scales for listening, for reading, for writing. The question about accuracy, how do you get raters to judge the same way? By having not just a short abbreviated accuracy statement, but by having a 100-page training manual and training. And then they also, within ACTFL, track the ratings given independently by different raters. And if they don't agree, then they analyze why not, and they retrain if they need to. It's an important question. Well, maybe we'll have time to come back